name is Elizabeth Peterson. I'm the director of the museum. I'm very happy to welcome you here tonight, and happy that you're here as part of our series. We have sheets with our concert series and lecture series up at the front, in case you missed those. I just heard from Brett Runnels that Miss Francine Reed is making a return, so she'll be our early December concert. We're adding that. But tonight, we're going to hear from Dr. Jeffrey Collins, who is Assistant Professor of Art History, who is, well, the first word that comes to mind when I think of Jeffrey is a Renaissance man, truly. He makes everything seem possible and does just about everything. So he must have more than 24 hours in the day. I don't know how he's done that. But he's also the director of the Study Abroad program and interdisciplinary studies. He was one of the people who pushed the Go Rome program that's just come to fruition. He does a lot for this campus. This evening he's going to talk to us about Leger de Corbusier, Italian Futurists, machines, and the dynamic city. Dr. Collins, thank you very much.
What am I competing with in television right now?
The Red Sox.
Oh man, better get a good lecture. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm honored that Jay Less, my colleague, is in the audience because we're kind of tag teaming these discussions along with other presenters. And some of what I'm going to start with, Dr. Lutz has already probably dealt with and talked about a little, which is fine. But I want to set the scene before I actually get into the analysis of some of the art I think you might find fascinating. And I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible for you and make this an exciting evening. And sometimes I go real fast and sometimes I go slow. So I can watch by your reaction if you're looking at me like, would you please slow down or whatever. But I'm really excited about this material. It's one of the most fascinating periods in all of our history, one of the most fascinating periods in all of human history, I think. Mainly because we went through extraordinary revolutions from 1901 to about 1930, 1920s. Of course, we all know about the 1920s, obviously, from pop culture, the flappers and bathtub gin and, all the wonderful dances, the foxtrot, and so forth. Wonderful cars, by the way. I love the cars in the 20s, but as these guys did. However, the 1920s also, you remember, was a revolution in physics. And it was a time in which everyone from de Broglie and Schrödinger and Einstein and de Pauli and Sir James Jeans were all reconfiguring basically the foundations and structures of the cosmos as we know it. So the 1920s was a huge revolution in thinking. But before the 1920s, another revolution was going on. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. And I really do think it is a revolution. These guys certainly thought it was. They certainly thought it was a time in which new ways of representing reality came to be. So what I've done is, I'm not a big fan of quoting from critics. I prefer to quote from the artists themselves. So I've got some quotes from these guys. Some of them are hilarious, some of them are kind of interesting. So each of the artists I'm going to present tonight, I have quotes from them, real quotes about what they thought about their own art. Because for me, I tell my students this, critics are wonderful, but go to them in a tertiary manner. First, look at the artists. Second, look at those who knew the artists. And third, then you can look at the critics. So I'm going to start tonight with one of the most famous paintings, which I know you know. And Holly, is there a way we can do a control plus to make it a little larger? I don't know if you can do that on this. Can we do that? Or will we not be able to? Mainly because this thing is gigantic. I don't know if you know this or not, but this painting is some of you know, no doubt have seen it. It's 8 foot by 7 foot. It's a huge painting. But I want to start tonight really with a way to understand the period we're about ready to get into. So if you'll indulge me just for a second, and just let this information flow over you, because again, I think Dr. Lutz may have covered some of this, and will again in another lecture. But I want to make sure you know the time period in which we're dealing. So in 1905, there was a very famous retrospective of the Fauvist, or the Fauvs, the wild beast of color, as you know. And in that period, we had a number of exhibits that were done by artists like Derain, Gauguin, Van Gogh, and others. And this really begins this period for us. So the big question is, from 1900 to 1920, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight, why Paris? Why not Detroit? Why Paris? What was it about Paris that so many painters, so many artists, so many intellectuals, so many revolutionaries came and sat in those cafes and smoked and drank, if they could afford it, and sat there and dreamed of a whole new reality. Why Paris? So let's see if we can answer some of that. So first of all, you know that I think Dr. Lutz may have talked about Montmartre, and of course you know that at that time it was just a few square miles. It really was originally a place for goats and vineyards, and it was really cut off from Paris, and as you know and all of us know, that becomes synonymous with a lot of these artists we're going to talk about. So it is the period, it is the geography of Picasso, Derain, and Braque, Georges Braque, which we'll talk about tonight. A couple of things you want to know. If you came to the lecture before with Dr. Lutz, you know that nearly one half of the artists who were there at Montmartre were foreigners. They came from all over. They came to Paris. I don't know what it is. The water? I mean, I love Paris. I still love it today. Even though it's a modern city, I still love what it is. What is it about Paris? Well, this is where we start developing the notion of the bohemian lifestyle. And I'm going to explain to you in a moment why that is true. It was also a community of writers and poets and painters. It was also the site of the Andrano Circus, as you know. And in 1904, a young man by the name of Pablo Picasso made his third visit to the Rue d'Avignon, which is, of course, a street there near his home. It's a place of cheap rent. And, of course, it was a place of no gas, no electricity, very little running water, and really, you had to go out to eat. Now, there was a law at the time that said that large groups of people cannot meet in public. You don't want, right? Politically, right? But what these guys did is meet in cafes. Pretty smart. And they could actually meet in small groups, in cafes. So this begins the cafe life of that period, which I really love. They would pass each other in the streets, these poets, these painters, these thinkers, these intellectuals, the manifesto writers. They would pass each other in the street, and the signal word they used to each other, the signal sentence, if you will, was, "How's the work going? How's the work going?" Picasso saw himself as a 9-to-5 kind of guy. He rolled up his sleeves, painted in his underwear, and went to work every day. There was work to him. It wasn't a pastime. And, of course, his good friend, Ferdinand d'Oliver, was also someone, of course, who his muse, Olivier, excuse me, who was a muse that inspired much of his early work, and we're going to be talking about some of that in a moment. Okay, some of his best friends. Apollinaire, yes, some of you know his name, Apollinaire, poet. Max Jacob, another poet at the time. Picasso actually scribbled, as you know, along his wall there where he lived. This is the rendezvous of the poets. Poets would walk up and down the street, sometimes singing, sometimes chanting, writing verse in their head. Picasso loved them, and they loved Picasso, and they were together a lot. Apollinaire, at this time, wrote something in one of his treatises in which he talks about the problem with tradition, artistic tradition, and what he called, and I love this expression, flowers of mystery. The flowers of mystery. And he said, we need, and this is a quote, we need new fire, new color. We need to, quote unquote, explore a kindness and the vast country of silence. He wrote this in a thing called The Zone, and then he said, most importantly for our discussion tonight, we are weary of that old world, meaning that old 19th century world of European intelligentsia, the world of dark, dank, dismal houses, cobblestone streets, and all that traditional art. You're going to see it all swept aside in a moment. Chagall in 1914, of course, was doing his work, and Apollinaire saw it, and he said his work was new and tremendous. So they all worked, as Dr. Lutz talked about, at a place called La Ruche, the Beehive. A number of artists working there simultaneously. I just love this when this happens. I tell my students when we're doing art history, I say, look, you know, every time I talk about the most important artists of all time, they all knew each other, darn it. It's amazing to me. I mean, think about Florence. You had Michelangelo, Botticelli, Leonardo. They couldn't stand each other, of course, but anyway, there you are. And there's a number of artists who were always congregating. And it seems that any kind of new construction, Renaissance, new ideas come about when a group of artists and poets work together. So we can see this even here again. Matisse, of course, and Picasso. Boy, there was an interesting pair. And of course, as you know, in 1905, Matisse painted his famous Woman with the Hat. Probably you know this particular piece. It was produced at the Independent Salon, the Salon of the Independent Artist, the public was so horrified by this new painting, which we won't see here, but you probably can get it in your head, just by seeing it. Because we're not going to talk about Matisse tonight, but the public was so horrified by this, so unready were they for this kind of art, they even tried to scratch the paint off of the painting. They were so dismayed and horrified by it, and shocked. But of course, fortunately, Gertrude Stein buys it. Good for her. Anyway, Braque, Georges Braque is brought in to look at it, and he says his whole life was transformed in one moment when he saw it in 1906, and after that, he produces 6 paintings based on that one famous painting by Matisse, one of these photos. Okay, cafe life, politics, art, smoky areas, places where potheads got together, intellectuals. I'd love to have seen it. Nothing like Starbucks. You know, I go to Starbucks across the street from Oglethorpe, not the one we have down in our area now, but Starbucks that used to be, you know, go down a bit, there it is in the corner. And, you know, I look at it and I go, this is nothing like cafe life was back then. It was an attempt, a feeble attempt. If this is a criticism of Starbucks, I hope nobody's representing Starbucks. You know, it's a feeble attempt to put tables there and have people sit around. Everybody's sitting there doing this, you know, and this. Nobody's talking about intellectual or revolutionary ideas, but these guys did. Now, you remember, they couldn't meet in public. They couldn't meet like this. That reign of revolutionary fervor, people were a little afraid of that. So there was a law against it. But they couldn't meet in the cafes, and they did. And of course, the other reason is practical. I mean, their apartments in that area were cold, drafty, and this was a good place to bundle up your steamed windows and talk about ideas. And so here you have the great poets of the early modern period, great artists of the early modern period, all of them sitting there. It must have been exciting to see. So, basically during this period, they began to plan those manifestos. The writers again can meet with press agents. In 1910, as you know, and as Dr. Lutz has talked about, there was a shift to the left bank for the intellectuals, the Montparnasse. And from this, we see a new kind of intellectual, artistic center erupt in a famous place called Le Dôme, which I'm sure you've heard from Dr. Lutz. Okay, it's 1907, Cézanne changes everything for us, and he creates a retrospective of his art, where we look at new colors, new solidarities, new forms, and Matisse, again, begins to be influenced by this, and also the breaking up of that solidarity with the reaction by Pablo Picasso. You know, there's a funny story about Picasso. His mother said, when she talked to him when he was a young man, she said, Pablo, if you had become a priest, you would end up being the Pope. If you had become a soldier, you would have been a general. And his famous response to his mother was, yes, mother, but I became a painter, and I came to be Pablo. So, by the way, the most prolific artist of all time thus far, 78,000 works of art thus far. So don't laugh at Picasso, you may not like his work. I love his work. But anyway, basically Cézanne, as we know, is a key to Cubism, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But remember, both Georges Braque and Picasso, Pablo Picasso, never exhibited in the 2 to 3 major shows of Cubism at all. In fact, they didn't like being called Cubist, as you're going to see in a moment. So I think there is a misnomer there. In fact, it's a terrible word. It's a misapplication, really, of what is really going on with their work. In 1907, of course, as we get into this, Pablo Picasso was painting his famous Blue Nude and the Demoiselles d'Avignon, which we'll look at in a moment. Picasso also becomes friends with D.H. Kahnweiler, who, of course, is the most famous art dealer who begins to push the Cubist art and was Picasso's great friend. I'm just going to give you a feel of what this place was like. We'll talk about the Demoiselles d'Avignon in a moment, but I do want to mention that in 1908, Braque returns to Cézanne country, and all of his canvases were rejected by the avant-garde. But on November 9th, 1908, the Cubist works of Braque were finally shown. And critics said this: what a daring young man. What a blasé statement, huh? Or my favorite, it looks like he's reduced all things to cubes. Hence the word. Right? In 1910 to 1911, Braque and Picasso began to push each other where they were in the studios. Must have been an amazing thing to see 2 gigantic geniuses forcing each other to push the boundaries and limits of what we call art. And there were some who recorded this. One person said, living near them said, it was like listening to two mountain climbers roped together, screaming at each other's obscenities. All night long they talked. Yes, yes, no, 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 yes, no, yes, yes, no, Pablo. Anyway, Picasso at this very point said, George Braque taught me much, but I learned this. You paint what you know is there, not what you see. Paint what you know is there, not what you see. Gertrude Stein, of course, thank goodness for her. Of course, we all know her from her autobiography of Alice Topos. She created, of course, a huge collection of these Cubist works, brought them to America, and began her Saturday evening salons here in America and introduced America finally to a modern art. Okay. All right, so let's look at this extraordinary work here, the Demon Cells d'Avignon, 1907. He spent a long time working on this piece. He said it was the damnedest piece he ever did, he said. But of course, as you know, this, in many ways, at least in our history classes, we always tend to start with this because it is the seminal work that welcomes us into the art of the modern. Well, let me tell you what a couple of people said when they saw it. One critic said, "What a terrible loss for French art." Okay. And a couple of others. Apollinaire brings Braque to actually meet Picasso. And he saw this, and he said, "My God, Pablo, what do you want us to do? Eat rope? Drink kerosene?" And you know what Pablo's famous reply was? Of course. And then he said, by the way, someday we're going to find Pablo Picasso hanging behind that painting. Well, of course, it never happened. Pablo Picasso died in the 70s, multimillionaire, and world famous. Okay, so when you look at this particular work, and I think it's important to understand it, I want to read for you a couple of quotes, because I think, it's always important to hear what the painter says. So if you don't mind, let me give you about 4 or 5 real quick fast quotes. Just listen to it. This is Pablo. "I do not paint things as I see them. I paint things as I think them. I'm always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it." I love that one. I get students to do that. Always do what you can't do. "Good artists copy. Great artists steal." That's not good. Later on in his life, when Pablo Picasso was much older, in the 60s and in the early 70s, when computers were first coming in, of course everybody wanted to interview him at that point. And he said one time to the press, computers are useless. They can only give you answers." Right. And one time he was asked about the amount of money he made. By the way, he was an astute businessman. Don't kid yourself. And they said, "Well, would you rather be poor like you were at the beginning or rich?" He said, "Well, you know what? I'd like to be a poor man with lots of money." I love that. His most beautiful statement, though, that I like is, "Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth." Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. When asked about this, he said, "Well, what do you want from me?" He was always like this, very feisty with the press. One day he'd say, and he would give an interpretation of it. Then the next day he'd say, "I was completely wrong. That's not what it is at all." I just love that about him. And he would say, "What we paint, what do you want me to paint?" He said. "What, the face? What's inside the face? Or what's behind it? How about all of it?" And he'd walk away, smirking at everyone. Right? That's the way he was. Painted in his underwear, 9 to 5, it was work. Never went anywhere. Stayed in his study. If you were to go to a study, you know what you'd see? A room like this, not this beautiful, of course. Paint on the walls, paint on the floor, a couple of magazines, newspapers, an old stool, a couple of bottles. That's it. You see? He didn't need a lot of stimuli out there. It was all, he said, in there. Painting is not what you see, it's what you think. Now, this particular painting, 8 foot by 7 foot, it's so small in it, but anyway, if you get to see it, it's extraordinary. And one of the things that is telling about this particular painting is not only his influences, but his new approach. And he never called this Cubist, although we tend to call it that. It was certainly just an experiment. And Cubism, by the way, didn't last very long either. But the thing you want to look at here is that, first of all, he looked at the sketches, and I looked at the sketches before he painted his masterpiece, the Demon Cells d'Avignon. What he has here is a couple of sketches in which he had a sailor standing here with his back to you, and then a student with a skull standing there, looking at these prostitutes. See the genius? Because as he began to complete the painting and finally finished in July of 1907, he took out those viewing them and made you the direct viewer. What a brilliant idea. And then he didn't want any of that old 19th century symbolism stuff. Student with a skull. Everybody go, oh, you see, that's symbolic. No. He did say about this painting that it was his actual impetus for this painting was his fear of prostitutes and venereal disease. Well, what is Avignon here? Not the city in France, and not even the street in which he lived in Paris, but rather it is a street, a red light district in Barcelona. And when asked about it, he said, do you really think women look like that? He said, they don't look like that. That's how they are. Of course, as you know, he's something of a misogynist. He said, there are two kinds of women, one that you love and others are doormats. That's all. So I don't support his views on that at all. But on the other hand, he did have a string of lovers and mistresses and a wife. He often liked to paint where he would bring over a mistress and his wife at the same time without telling them. They'd get in a fight with each other. Then he'd paint and say, keep doing that. That's right. Keep fighting. Let me get the energy from that. He was very manipulative. He was a misogynist. There's no doubt about it. On the other hand, he kind of smoothed out his views and opinions and feelings much later in his life, which I think is probably a good thing. But anyway, let me talk a little bit about this painting, then we'll move on to George Braque. Okay, you can see it's rather a hideous thing, right? Garish colors. Notice what he does. He throws out this painting, of all paintings along with George Braque, throws out all traditional historical painting traditions, does it not? It throws out orthogonals. It throws out the horizon line. It throws out the distinction between foreground, background, midground, doesn't it? It just does this. It collapses space, right? Now remember, in 1905, not that there's any convergence here, and not that Picasso was reading Albert Einstein, but in 1905, a young man, a Swiss patent clerk, completely unknown to the world, wrote 3 papers that changed the world forever: electromagnetism and comments on Maxwell. And in those 3 papers, of course, we get special relativity. We get the notion of the collapse of the absolutes of time and space. Isn't it interesting that these paintings also collapse space? And they do virtually, in a painterly way, what Einstein did with physics and equations. It's the same thing. So if you look at it, he is discovering on his own, in a studio, what Einstein studied and worked with when he produced his 3 papers. Okay, what we have here, as you can see very quickly, we have the women, and we have a profile here, these 2 women, this woman, and then that one. They get progressively horrific, do they not? None of them will win a Miss America contest. All right? So these are prostitutes, and this is his feeling about prostitutes. Remember, he paints what he thinks, not what he sees. And if you look at it, we've got breasts and arms that are jagged like pieces of glass. And we've got one woman here, and by the way, don't kid yourself, Pablo Picasso was a brilliant classicist. He knew every single tradition and could imitate any of them. So if you look, we've got a woman standing here, profile, with her arms stiff like this, amongst the contrapposto, Egyptian. We've got Greek and Roman, like Venuses. You see what he's doing? He's playing with all the traditions of the nude. And then he comes up, and you got this woman over here, and this woman over here, and that's pure Pablo Picasso. Now, he had been, and by the way, he lied a lot about this, but we know for a fact he saw them. There was an Ibero-African mask exhibit at what today is called the Van Museum, anthropological exhibit, mask. Pablo Picasso was not an anthropologist. He totally misunderstood the African mask and what they really meant. He felt they had to do something, what he called with exorcism. So if you look, we look like we're looking at African masks. You can see that? That certainly is an African mask, yes, with the hollowed out eye, the hideous coloration, the long nose, the snout. You get this woman here, and we're starting to move in that Picasso style. You see that? The eyes shifted like this, right? The nose looking like a meat cleaver. That's pretty scary, right? She's squatting. When asked what she's doing, he said, well, she's defecating. I'm using a nice word. She's pooping near a bowl of rotten fruit. Gross. And one person said, this grosses us out, Pablo. He says, precisely. So the point I want to make here is that he has revolutionized the notion of the nude, but it's not so much anymore the subject matter. and you're going to see a lot of this and get into this. It's not subject matter anymore. It's how it's painted and what revolutions you can create on the canvas. We'll see this as we go through. So there's Pablo. I want to come now to Georges Braque. Again, I'd like to start with a couple of quotes by him, if you don't mind. So I'd like to quote from the artist. He said, in some of his writings and some of his discussions, he said, with people, he said, there's only one valuable thing in art, that which you cannot explain. Love it. Truth exists, he says. Only lies are invented. Art, he said, is made to disturb. Think about what we just saw. Science, he said, only reassures. Once an object, he said, has been incorporated into an image, it accepts a new destiny. Love that. Once you create a new object in a painting, it takes on a new destiny. That's like creating a cosmos. And my favorite one of all, Georges Braque said, to define a thing is to substitute the definition for the thing itself. Now think about how many times we've done that. We don't really understand things. For example, this thing is called a podium, and those are just sounds I'm making, and agreed upon words and letters coming from the Latin. What really is this? Science would tell you something entirely different, right? 99% empty. Quantum physics would tell you there's particles swirling in and out of reality here. This doesn't really exist. So, once again, to define a thing is to substitute the definition for the thing itself. We are hung up on definitions. And I think the first of the 20th century really challenged us to think differently about thingness, about the thing, and not to describe it and be so hung up with the definition of it. So, let's take a look at what Georges Braque does. Now again, we have a graphic representation here. This is called the Portuguese, done in 1911. It's about 117 by 31 centimeters. It's an oil on canvas, of course, and it is a graphic representation, I think, of many of the relativistic principles that, again, Albert Einstein came up with in 1905. Now, again, Albert Einstein's work did not make it to Europe at all. This stuff was already being done. This stuff was not really known until the 20s. Never even made it to America until the 1920s, where he was greeted with the ticker tape parade, and 20,000 people showed up to see this wild-haired professor on a boat. Can you imagine us doing that? I mean, that's only reserved now for Lady Gaga and U2, right? Thousands of people showing up with the ticker tape parade. But that's what it was. It was fantastic. So anyway, graphic representation, as you can see, of relativistic principles. That is, if you look at it very carefully, all traditions of Western art are abandoned. Right? It's over. It's over. It's time for it to be over. That is, there's nothing wrong with all the beautiful art of the past, but don't keep your nose in the past. Wait till we get to the Italian Futurists. Boy, I'm going to read some of the manifesto words. Oh my heavens, what those guys say. Anyway, the relationship between figure and ground, everybody understand figure and ground? It's completely gone now. It's totally abandoned. There's no figure and ground here. And a unified pictorial configuration, as you can see here, perfectly expressed, in which you can see the shapes floating. See that? On the picture plane. Monochromatic color, another thing. They moved against the wild beast of color. Monochromatic silvery grays here, if you will. There's fragmentation, geometric structures. You can see it clearly. But you can see some barely recognizable clues, can't you, to what's being painted. And if you look very carefully, it's very important to understand that people always want to say this is abstract art. It is not abstract art. In fact, Georges Braque and Picasso said there is no such thing as abstract art. It is all representational. We have to start somewhere. So, and again, Kandinsky might say differently, but these guys didn't believe it. What we're looking at then, ultimately, is a new pictorial language. That's what these guys were after. Instead of the subject being the most important part of the painting, what you have here is a representation of the Portuguese person and is anti-naturalistic. That's all it is. It's not necessarily abstract, but it shatters all the conventions of Western art. Remember, most of them having to do with scientific perspective, right? Horizon line, vanishing point, orthogonal lines, this is larger than that, scale, and all that's abandoned. Because we needed a new pictorial language. I firmly believe that it came about because of photography. Photography put an end to all that, pretty much. And these artists embrace it, from Manet and Monet and all the way up. They realize, wow, wait a minute, we can take a photograph, right? Nowadays we take our cell phones, click, right? Why spend all your time doing meticulous work on a painting? We can just take a damn photograph. And these guys realize, hey, wait a minute. The canvas better become something else, or we're going to lose, or we'll become extinct. And that's what they did. They invented a new pictorial language, not so much to counter the camera, but to incorporate it. And that's going to lead us into the incorporation of artists and technology. Okay, so let's go to Léger, and we're going to talk a little bit about him. You've probably heard enough about him already, and he's an amazing artist, I think. We're going to look at a couple of things he did. He moved to Paris in 1900, again, working with all these guys that were there. Did you know that originally he was an architectural draftsman? Far more interested in architecture than he was in painting. He did a very famous image of the nude model in the studio. This is in 1912, and it's about 50 inches, about 37 inches. Now, everybody take a look at this for a moment. I really love his work because he, like many of the artists at the time, wanted to embrace the new technologies and city life, which we'll talk about at length in a moment. Okay, so we've got mechanical shapes. You can see that, yes. We've got almost a total emphasis on mechanical technology and machines. In fact, one critic called it, this is not Cubism, this is Tubism. It does look like tubes, right? He formed with a couple of poets and intellectuals and artists like Villon and Kabbalah, a group called the Golden Section. Paradoxical, since that relates to ancient mathematical constructs. But anyway, he did a lot of public projects too. I don't know if you know this or not, but he did murals for the pavilion, the New Spirit, and he also, as you know, traveled in America. He actually breaks with Cubism, and while he was in America, he actually painted 1946 romantic landscape, and then, of course, as you know, he dies in 1955 and did some beautiful murals that are now hang in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations in New York. I don't know if you have seen those. Okay, so what are we looking at here? The first thing you look at is that it is a very idiosyncratic Cubist style, but it's its own take on that. It was inspired by Cézanne, and the inspiration comes from his attempt to represent three-dimensional objects on a flat, two-dimensional canvas in a new way. Now, if you go back to the Renaissance, you think of Brunelleschi, and you think of any of the painters like, for example, everyone from Giotto to, say, Botticelli, they all tend to want to create this illusion of foreground, midground, background. And as we look into the painting, we're looking at an illusionary world, like a window into reality, right? And we want it to be so real, it looks like a photograph, right? Okay, so this is a new attempt to do that very thing too, a three-dimensional representation on a flat two-dimensional canvas, but in a new, more dynamic way. It says, we've arrived, we're in the 20th century, this is a city, this is a new model. We'll see the city in a moment. This is a new way of producing the new model. I don't know, I just saw a wonderful film the other night. I was thinking about all this attempt, because think about it, all of Western art from Greeks till now has been about trying to give us a representation of reality that is convincing, that's compelling. And the Greeks moved, as you know, from stiff statuary to very realistic stances of people in three-dimensional gestures, right? We're doing the same thing with our televisions. We're doing the same thing with movies. I went and saw the fabulous film Gravity, which I highly recommend all of you see. You had to put on 3D glasses. Anybody seen it? None of you seen Gravity? Go see Gravity. It's fabulous. Fabulous. It'll knock your socks off. And I'm thinking, you know, along with James Cameron, one of my great heroes, that when he creates a three-dimensional camera, he's doing nothing more technologically than an extension of this. This is on canvas with his Avatar movie, and now with Gravity, you're going to see where we're moving. And it's always been that. We want more of our imagery to look three-dimensional and so real we can touch it. Now, here, he does, again, pretty much what is common in this period. The figures are all, as you can see, broken. They're splintered against a kind of a faceted background. He completely gives us a new idea of field and object, right? Field and object, that is background and the actual nude, how they interpenetrate. And by doing that, we create even still, paradoxically, precisely delineated form. You see it? You can see clearly everything there. The colors, of course, prevail and that was very important at this time, with arcs, as you can see, and curving planes, rhythmic surface, quite beautiful. Volumetric body and dynamic space. He's again using what Cezanne said, all these clashes and overlaps. This is what you see in the city. You got a lot of jumping, and those jumps, as you can see, what I mean by the jumps is they jump from one image to the next very quickly. You can see that? That staccato jumping. You know where that came from? It came about because of the new cinematic suite of a movie camera. Now, Murbridge and Murray had already done their chronophotographic images of horses running. You've seen these things, right? A man running in different sequences of that, right? They tried to prove that all the horse legs were up off the ground at one time. Remember, this is a big thing back then. And because of that sequencing, artists began, instead of denying the technology, which I think is a definite thing artists should never do, is deny the very technologies that are coming towards you. Instead, you embrace them. These artists decided to embrace them. And so by embracing them, they saw that they could clearly make a canvas using some of that and capture, I think very excitedly, the city as it is. Staccato, excitement, smoke, telephone poles, people moving, cars. They're going to love cars. You can hear that? I love it. Huge scale envelops us. Again, this is a small thing. It's very large, but it's a huge scale. It's 7 foot by 9 foot. This thing is huge. And it envelops you like a huge, I don't know, when I look at it, it looks like a huge theater backdrop when you walk into it. Fragmented cityscapes, all kinds of colors. But he also uses these flat, unmodulated colors. That's very important. So you've got primary yellows, and you have, again, as you can see, some purples and what else? Some blacks, certainly. So I wanted to show you that because this leads us into a period in which artists began to see the city as the place to be. You know, forget romantic countrysides. There's a lot of cockroaches out there. Well, a lot of cockroaches in cities too. You know, get over the countryside. The city is where we are. And the city defines us, and we define it. We shape it, it shapes us. It's still doing that today. It seems that destiny and the future of humanity would be in massive megacities. So, if that's the case, let's look at some artists who not only embraced it, but accepted it as part of the future. So now we're going to turn to a group of people called the Italian Futurists. I'm going to skip over that. Corbusier, we'll come back to him. We love this guy. Okay, but we'll come back to him. You wouldn't want to take an exam from that guy. Look at that guy. Scares the hell out of you. Look at that. But I love him. He's an interesting fellow. Died in 1947. Luigi Russolo. Everybody heard of him? Now, there's a bunch of Italian futurists. Let me just kind of run over what futurism is in case you maybe knew some of you. Okay, so what is it? It first started, really, Italian futurism as a literary movement. And the leader of the movement was F.T. Marinetti. He wrote as a poet, an essayist, and a manifesto writer. The first exhibit was in 1911 in Paris, but the whole movement started in Turin, Italy, in March of 1910. Basically what it is the artistic desire to embrace and accept and infuse into their works technology, industrial machines, and speed. These guys loved cars. Yahoo! So do I love cars. You like Italian sports cars? Boy, I do. Is an Italian sports car as beautiful as a winged Victory of Samothrace? I don't know. I've seen some gorgeous ones, and I love the winged Victory of Samothrace. You're going to see what they're going to say. I'm going to read you Italian. I did an Italian translation of manifestos. I got to read you what these guys said. Now, I will tell you, although I'm smiling and laughing about all this, the sad, tragic side of this is that many of these Italian futurists were fascist. They fully embraced war, what they call the hygiene of war. Okay, that's getting a little politically iffy. Bottom of me. And then, of course, a lot of them died getting what they desired. They died in World War I. So this wasn't a very long-lived movement. But there's some things about it I think are fascinating. So let's take a look at it. And if we can put aside the politics from it, although some critics say you can't, there's no way you can talk about futurism without talking about the fascism, the politics, their desire to overthrow capitalism and all that. Okay, fair enough. But on the other hand, for tonight, let's just look at the art. So the first thing, what do? These Italian futurists were hot-headed young Italian men. Have any of you been around hot-headed, leather pant, Vespa riding Italian men? Okay, I hate to be stereotypic, but well, I have. And I've set cafes with them, and boy, it sounds like Italian Futurists. So I don't know whether it's just in the blood or in the water, but just for fun, let me give you what they said and see what you think about it. So the first thing they were against was the past, totally and ultimately. Total rejection of the past. We have to clear away a creative space, they said, and we've got to find a way to let go of the past. Stop worshiping the past, they said. Get over it. Get your nose out of Italian history books. Face the moment. Face the now. Be in the city now. These were the Italian Futurists. I'm going to read to you in a moment what they actually said. Marinetti started a new literary form using new typefaces. He looked very much like E.E. Cummings. Big, bold typefaces. Abstract line lengths. And a lot of interesting spacing. A lot of people called it a form of Italian Cubism. But in fact, it drew some inspiration only from radical turning away from the past and an absolute embrace of this moment of the present. So here's what their holy trinity, they said, was this: machines, war, and speed. And they love speed. Now we're thinking, what, 20 miles an hour? I mean, come on, back then. Can you imagine what they would? I mean, I would think they would be sitting in gravity film and going nuts over that. They would love that. Nelson, some of your love of cars, they would love the new cars we're putting out right now. They would love an Audi any day, okay? They like speed. They like machines. And by the way, the Bauhaus, as you know, in the 1930s was producing some beautiful industrial products that are just as beautiful as works of art that we hang on walls. I'm convinced of it. Look at some of the Bauhaus furniture. Lovely stuff. So anyway, they were really for speed, and they loved the idea of machines. After 1917, the Italian Futurists went over, sadly enough, a lot of them to Mussolini and glorified war in the Italian nation and became super patriots in many ways. Many of them died in World War I. Okay, let me give you a point. Let me just show you how revolutionary they were. You've got to remember, Italian poetry at this point was very staid, stanza-ridden, a lot of rhyming. Okay, so Russolo, which we'll talk about in a moment. This is a quote he gives about a marvelous free verse poem. The poem was written by Marinetti. And this poem describes what they loved most: hot, heated battles. Now at this time, the context was that Italy was invading Libya. Oops, where we are today, right? Libya. It was the first war in which bombs were dropped from airplanes. And boy, did the Italian Futurists love that. So, here's the quote that Russolo gives from Marinetti. Here's the point. Marinetti saw and heard about this war, the first dropping of bombs in Libya. And so here's his point. Load, fire, what a joy to hear and smell complete ta-da-ra, 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 ta-da-ra of machine guns and all those beautiful corpses falling on the ground. Love it! Shrapnel, waving, arms, exploding, white handkerchiefs full of gold. Sir, tum, 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 tum. And those beautiful grenades teasing out bursts of very black hair. Zang, zer, tum, zang, tum, tum, tum. Boom! The orchestra of the noises of war swelling under a held note of silence in the high sky, round, golden balloons that observe all that firing. Well, today we might find that politically distasteful and certainly politically incorrect, but there we are. These guys love war, and then of course, sadly enough, they got what they were looking for. Most of them died. So at first they thought that, well, you know, war is, as they said, hygiene. Now, there's other things they said. I'm going to give you what they say here. Here's Marinetti. You know what he said? At a speech at a cafe with all these hot-headed Italian futurists, he said, I am the caffeine of Europe. I love that. I mean, what would we say today? I am the Starbucks of Europe. Okay. So, he wanted to emancipate Italy from its past and, of course, stop the worshiping of old poetry, old history paintings, all that Renaissance stuff. Tear down the ceilings of the Sistine, he said. Drain the canals of Venice. Burn all the libraries you get your hands on. Destroy everything, churches, monuments, kick over statues. Wow. Do you think he meant that? Well, a lot of people said he was a jokester. A lot of people said it was tongue-in-cheek. Others said he was half serious. Others said he was clearing simply a space. Others said he was just a hothead. Believe what you want. But all the manifestos, interesting enough, that he wrote were published before any of the art of the Italian Futurists was even created. Which I think is kind of interesting. He said this: all forms of imitation are to be despised. All subjects previously used shall be utterly discarded. What was true for a painter yesterday is no longer true for an artist and painter today. In fact, I want to tell you something. The Italian Futurists became so popular in the short time that they actually created. Did you know that children stopped playing cowboys and Indians in the streets of Italy and played Futurists? I don't know how you play that, but there you are. Okay, here's what he said. Time and space, quote, died yesterday. We are living now in the absolute. Doesn't that sound like Einstein? Time and space died yesterday. We are living in the absolute, for we have already created eternal, ever-loving, ever-present, capital S-P-E-E-D, speed. How fast can you go? That's what he's interested in. So this is Russolo. He died in 1947. He wrote a wonderful book called The Art of Noises. I've got to tell you something funny about this. And I looked all over the internet trying to find it. It doesn't exist. But we're going to look first at the Revolt in 1911. And again, the Revolt typically shows us a cityscape where we have a distortion of perspective, we've got dazzling color, and it looks like we've got people, as you can see, masses running towards a new horizon. That's what these Italian futurists want. And for all their fascist leanings, and for all their super patriotism, and for all their hot-headed, machine love, all that, besides all that, they really saw themselves as a visionary, moving towards a new future, and particularly in this one, the Revolt. At 16, he moves to Milan. And then, of course, as you know, he grew up in a musical family. His etchings were shown in 1909 at the Famiglia Artistica, where he meets Boccioni. We'll talk about him. I'll tell you something you may not know about this guy, Russolo. He developed, along with it, I just love these guys, they're so involved with so much in different levels. Not only was he an artist, he was an inventor and developer of new instrumentation. And we know something about this. He developed new musical instruments to integrate, for the first time, unconventional sounds. I mean, think about it. Before Stravinsky and the Rite of Spring and all that, people were listening to lush operas, lush, beautiful music of Mozart, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's all wonderful and great. However, these artists believed it was time for something new. It was time to move away from, the Strauss waltzes. What they wanted were sounds of the city, which if you walk around Atlanta, you listen to these sounds, they begin to almost sound poetically beautiful. Let me read to you what, before we get further with him, Baudelaire. You know what Baudelaire said? The life of our city is rich and poetic, marvelous subjects. We are enveloped and steeped as though in an atmosphere of the marvelous, and yet we don't see it. So, he grew up in a musical family. He invented a thing called, ready for this? An intono tumari, which translates as noise intoners. Now, if you want to tonight, do a Google. They would love for you to do Googles about these Italian futurists. They would love all this stuff. They would probably be, texting as much as we do when we drive, of course, right? Right. All right. So here we go. We shouldn't be, but we are. All right. Here we go. Noise intoners. And there's an actual photograph of very large, looking like giant speakers and big megaphones. And he's standing there with a group of other artists. And we hear that the description was there were booms and hisses and drilling noises and buzzes of the city. He actually gave a concert in the 1920s with his famous intono mare. And this was a kind of instrument that he created. He created another thing called a keyboard called the Russolo Phono. And in that particular keyboard, he was able to create musical instrumentation that mimicked the sounds and the harsh environments of the city, bringing it all together, although sadly enough, no recording existed. And apparently thousands attended these concerts and wanted to hear it because these were new sounds. It reminds me a lot of what the Dadaists were doing, of course, in their cafes. So I'm going to show you one. The next one is called the dynamism of a car. Do we have that? Oh, is this what we're going to do? Yeah, dynamism of an automobile. Well, anyway, so 1912. This is where he made his famous statement. That is, Marinetti said, "A racing car was far more beautiful than the Nike of Samothrace." Wow. Now, is that an exaggeration? Probably. These are hyperbolic statements. These guys did not torch any library. They didn't destroy monuments. They didn't go in and put giant X's over Mona Lisa. They wanted to, probably. But in their heart of hearts, what they were really saying, as you probably can figure, is this. Let's do something else. Let's move beyond this. How many more nudes can you paint? How many plates of apples do you want? Right? Come on, we've done enough still lifes. Let's do something more interesting and something that reflects our time. So, of course, you know, and I know that, of course, now cars are so obviously part of our landscape. We didn't think about it, but realize what cars were for these people. I mean, there are scenes, we have photographs in Paris of cars and horse and buggies still going, side by side. I mean, cars were extraordinary for these people at the time. It meant individual movement. It meant speed. For the first time, human beings were moving faster than horses. That's amazing. So he creates this wonderful masterpiece. It reflects his interest, by the way, in chronophotography, as you can see, sound waves. There's a time dimension in this. There's compression to sound waves as the car moves. But again, you notice that we still have the image there. It's not abstract. Very similar to the physics textbooks at the time. Illustrations for the first time of the Doppler effect. Once again, we have artists who are paying attention to what science is telling them and making new, beautiful images that relate to that. Okay? So I'm going to go now to, let's go ahead and go over next to, I guess we'll move to Bala. Yeah. Wow, what a mustache, huh? Well, what am I talking about? Oh, there's a mustache, right? That's a real mustache. Mine's fake, right? All right, so 1958, he dies in 1958. Really interesting artist. I like him. He's the son of a photographer. Studied music. Went to several art academies, of course. And by the way, he was the first artist in the West to introduce graffiti into formal art. Now, we've had graffiti on the walls of Pompeii, but formal art, no. He's the first one to do it. Pretty interesting. This is the one I think Holly likes a lot, the dynamism of a dog. Isn't that cute? But there's more than just cute here, obviously, but it's wonderful. It reminds you of cartoons, does it not? You got to remember what it's like. 1912, wow, people never saw anything like this before. Because what has art been? It's always been a frozen moment, right? An apple, right? A nude lying on, you know, Venus Rubino, frozen. Everything's always frozen. The question was, how can we get the movement, the dynamism, into a painting? And so, in a fun way, he looks at a lot of the women in the streets at that time who were walking their dogs. This is a Dutch, right? Sausage dogs, I think it's fun. Anyway, what he's dealing with here is simultaneous views of time. You see it? Now, it's a little clunky. Okay, we'll give him that. It's not anywhere near the beauty of the photography, but he's trying to give us a sense of this. And of course, you can see the feet of the woman and the feet of the dog. And in fact, one critic said, "It looks to me like we've got a widow here with 15 feet. We've got a dog with 8 tails. He's just beside himself. He probably didn't sleep that night, right? He probably didn't take an executive PM if he was still around that time. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? People are just disturbed by this. Why? They're showing movement and movement in time. So he's not freezing time anymore. He's letting it come to the surface. He's influenced here by, again, Ray's famous chronophotographic imagery. And again, successive movements. He uses stark black forms there, and what I think is wonderful, if you really look at it, it's a ground level view. You see that? Ground level view. You've got the view of the dog. I love that. And we don't even see the woman. That's not important. We just see her feet. That's what the dog would see. Right? I just love it. I love it. So again, it's his attempt to do that. Now, take a look at the next one. This is a scientific piece. Mercury passing before the sun, 1914. I love that these guys were beginning to use science and scientific discovery much like the Renaissance artists did. And so, although very different in Prince's approach, you can see they're doing something similar. So in 1914, he paints this. It's 120 by 100 centimeters. This is temper on paper. Now, it's based on his studies of his own observations of a partial eclipse of the sun. I don't know whether he was looking straight into it or not, but I hope not. But on November 7th, 1914, the same eclipse, by the way, that those who are trying to prove the theory of relativity were paying attention to. Isn't that interesting? On one hand, in another part of the world, in Australia and in South America, these guys were watching that eclipse. Here's an artist, no equations, no scientific formula, was looking at the same thing. Here's what he comes up with. Now, what you see, he said the white triangles there are really the impact on the naked eye. And then if you look further, as he looks away, you've seen this. You look at a bright light and turn away, you get all these lines. Okay? The green core, he said, is his retina looking down the telescope. You see it? So he's looking at Mercury passing before the sun. Now, what's interesting about this is we don't have any art up until this time that does anything like that. Suddenly, art pulls in cosmology. Exciting. Finally, we're getting artists to broaden, expand, and reach out in a very, I think, an interdisciplinary way, which is really exciting. Look at the next one. This is called, I believe it's called Abstract Speed, right? Yeah. Abstract Speed and Sound, 1914. This is oil on board. This is 21 by 30 inches, not very large. And again, can you imagine what is the subject, quote unquote? You know what it is? Exactly what you see when you get in your car, you drive, and you're looking out the window. Now, we're driving 60 miles an hour. These guys were driving at 20 and 30. They thought that was amazing, right? Okay, so what you're looking at is the automobile as you look through a window. For the first time, humans now are seeing not frozen landscapes as you walk like this or ride a horse, right? Now you're seeing landscapes do this, right? You've got to capture that. That's our new reality. So here, the automobile is a new symbol and an altered landscape. Landscapes get altered by the passing of the car, you say. So we have crisscross fragmentation, multiple lines. You can see this all the time in your car when you drive home tonight. The painted frames, as you see here, continues it beyond the edge of the actual canvas itself. So this is the edge of the canvas here. You can see what he did? He just continues the fragmentation beyond the paint onto the actual painted frame itself. To give you this sensation, there is no boundary. Speed is speed. Now, Einstein said the ultimate speed of the cosmos is 186,300 miles a second. C, represented by C, this famous formula. And that with that, therefore, time ceases to exist. There is no absolute time or absolute space. It's one continuum. This artist seems to have captured that perfectly without even having studied outstanding physics. Dali later would write letters to Einstein. Einstein said to Dali, your paintings are saying what I'm saying in mathematics. Dali wrote back and said, your stuff is saying what my paintings are saying. Okay, so here we go. Let's come now to Boccioni, one of my favorite. Umberto. Just love what these guys look. What he's a handsome person. Okay. All right. So 1960. He died in 1960. And you know, sadly enough, he didn't live very long, but he would have obtained extraordinary, I think, visionary and artistic power. But anyway, he attended the Belle Arte di Roma, which is one of the art schools in Rome. He was very interested in and involved with socialism. He was reading a lot of Nietzsche. He was also very fascinated as a futurist with being outrageous and outraged. He was highly rebellious, hated capitalism. He had a good friendship with Severini, which was one of the Italian futurists in 1906. He studied Impressionism for a while in Paris, hated it, ended it, didn't do it anymore. Then he became the main theorist for the Italian futurist. Again, folks he's fascinated with, well, Marinetti's manifesto tells us. Speed, violence, anti-feminism, and the machine. Get it all, he said, in your art. So, 1912, he exhibits in London. 1916, he was drafted, World War I, and sadly enough was killed by being thrown from a horse in a military exercise. Okay, let me read, now go to, if you would, go to his, this is amazing. Let's take a look at this thing. This is his famous States of Mind, the Farewells. I'll explain in a moment what he's saying there, but allow me to read you a couple of quotes by him. Am I talking too fast? I probably am, but that's okay. Here we go. Boccioni, here's what he said. Our ancestors drew their subject matter from the religious attitude which weighed upon their soul. We must now learn to draw inspiration from the tangible miracles right in front of us. See what he's saying? See, artists were always looking towards the past, to Jerusalem, to Jesus on the cross, to a Buddha. Now, he says, the artist must, as Baudelaire says, look at what is in front of you, the tangible miracles of the city. And all you got to do is drive around. The other night I was driving around with my wife, and we were driving down through the city. They're actually back right here in Buckhead. I went, this is marvelous. She said, what? Look what humanity has done. For all of its negativity and all of its crime and social problems, still, these gorgeous buildings. I mean, particularly going down through, gorgeous. And I think these Italian futurists will love it. Well, anyway, he says this: there's neither painting nor sculpture, nor music nor poetry. Only truth is creation. What was this guy create? Look at this one. This is called States of Mind. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not. States of Mind. He did a triptych of these. This was done in 1911 called the Farewells. Now, where did he get the idea? Well, he liked to go to train stations. I guess today we go to the MARTA. And he liked to see people kiss, goodbye, bye-bye, see you later. So he would get, farewells, people arriving, farewells, people arriving, yes, no, goodbye, get out of my face, goodbye, I'm glad you're gone. And then also huggy, you're back, all that stuff. He liked to look at all that. He did sketches. So this is one of a trilogy of paintings he did, and it's really a liberation, I think, in my mind, from the frigid formality and forms of the Cubists. And what we have here is an atmosphere that's completely shattered, and in a way, a new representation of the miracle in front of us, which is a railroad station. Now, you know what? I would wish I could do this. I don't have time, but I'd love to read some poems by Walt Whitman. All of you probably read Walt Whitman, Reads the Grass from Temple. You know how much love Walt Whitman put into his description of cities, particularly Chicago and other places? He loved the city. He loved the smells, the sounds, the feistiness of people, the struggle. He loved all that. And I think in many ways, this will tie in very nicely with some of these states of mind. This is called States of Mind. It's a railroad station. People are saying goodbye, the farewells. Right? In 1914, he published, then he turned from painting to futurist sculpture. In 1914, he published the famous Futurist painting and sculpture. He did 11 sculptural works from 1912 to 1913. 11. I'm going to show you one that's amazingly beautiful. He did 11 in a period of 1 year. Sadly enough, they're all destroyed in college. You know what happened to it? Probably during the war. So we'll go look at the unique forms of. Anybody has seen this? You've seen it? Fabulous, huh? The unique forms of continuity in space. Notice he doesn't call it Apollo, right? He doesn't want to do that anymore. So, unique forms of continuity in space, 1913. It's 47 inches tall. The first one he did was in wax. He did one in plaster. Then finally, of course, the final one was cast in bronze in 1931, and then later 1929. Of course, he was already dead by then, but the point I want to make here is that with this particular image, we really see the thrust of the modern movement in sculpture. What do we have? A synthetic continuity, as I call it, of motion, instead of that old Cubist idea of fractured discontinuity, right? Remember how we started off with the Demon Zells, very fractured discontinuity. Now we've got a new approach. And with the Italian Futurists, what we have is a synthetic continuity, movement, fluid movement here. In fact, what we have here, it looks like an athlete striding. Can you see his body? It's really not about the body, though. It's about what the body does. Its speed, it's the essence of movement. That's what he's trying to get. So he did this particular piece with all the, what he liked to do is break open the forms, as you can see here, the phalanges sticking off here, looking like, almost like a winged victory, right? And twists and turns and torques the figures and opens it up, splays them open to show you movement and speed, which is one of the great trinities you know of. What's interesting about this, to show you how popular it became, it's one of my favorite sculptures of all time. This became so well known and so loved in Italy that it is now engraved on the back of an Italian 20th cent euro. You'll see it on the back of that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Development of a bottle in space. You're not bored, are you? Okay, good. We only got 4 more hours. We'll be done. So, all right, just a few more things. Okay, development of a bottle in space, 1912. This is a pretty cool guy. Bocione, you know what he did? He was so fascinated by the new industrial standards and new methods. He went and went to a bottle factory. Watched bottles go by. Cool, right? Before, you had to make every bottle individual. Waste of time, waste of good energy, waste of creativity. You got to make the bottle, you got to make the bottle, you got to mold. Oh my goodness, right? Well, now with the Industrial Revolution, which we're all heir to, right? Now we slide our card into a slot, and pull out a Coke plastic, and there we are. Or sometimes glass, right? So he liked the beauty of these bottles going by, the sound of the rattling. So he created this new sculpture, bronze. Development of a bottle in space. I just love it. It's a 3/4 section, as you can see, of a bottle being molded. Now you can see the bottom down here, the pan, the bottom part of the bottle, exaggerated at the base, and then to the right of that bottle, you see an empty holder over there on a conveyor belt. They were fascinated by machines, the whirring of conveyor belts, bottle parts, and here we have a chaotic, twisted dynamism. And what they kept using this word over and over as I read them in the manifestos, dynamism. What they meant by that is movement, energy, excitement. I mean, nothing against small town, everyone. I like small towns too, to get away from the wild dynamism of the city. But sometimes after a while in a small town, you're going, give me back to New York City, right? I'm sorry, but if you think about it, it's much more exciting in a city, isn't it? The wild atmospheres, the cars whirring by, the noises, the energy, the movement, the creativity. Yeah, that's what these guys wanted. And now we have it. And it's the miracle right in front of us. Okay, so, well, I want to tell you a few things about this. In 1892, just as a sidelight, Gazanay was an inventor who was the first to actually create the automated glass bottle making machine. So this wasn't too far along after that. Okay? All right. Moving right along. All right, so here we go. I want to come now to our next image, which is, love this guy. Okay. Now this is another sad story, but a brilliant artist. I don't know if you know about him or not. He is an architect, and he dies in 1916. And you can see his dates. If you look very carefully, you can calculate the age. He died very, very young. Sadly enough, again, killed in World War I. Now, in 1912, this young man opens a design office as an architect in Milan. And he was influenced by another architect by the name of Alfred Loos. I don't know Alfred Loos or not. Those who take in modern architecture with me know his name. Alfred Loos wrote a wonderful book called, or pamphlet, it's called Ornament and Crime. And in it he says this: anyone who decorates their houses, outside or inside, should be taken out and shot. He hated decoration. Now, of course, but the basic notion is this: you've got to remember where he grew up. Vienna, Austria. You ever been to Vienna, Austria? I love the city. But you've got to understand what it was like back then. Very staid, traditional houses, with a lot of tic-tacky design on them. Frank Lloyd Wright went nuts, couldn't stand it. And all that Victorian stuff, and all those really strange-looking chimneys, with like witch hats, and bizarre gabling, and all that stuff that people like to put on their houses. I've seen some here in Atlanta. This guy, St. Eli, and also Frank Lloyd Wright, along with Alfred Loos, hated decoration. What they said was this: if we're going to make a new architecture, we've got to make an architecture that makes sense to the new materials and to the new world and to the cities. The decoration is not stuff you hang on the wall. Don't mean to point to that, I love that, but I mean, people hang stuff on walls, right? And they tended to over-decorate. It's the wall, it's the material itself that is the decoration. In other words, the architecture is your decoration. So they began to develop a new way of understanding the future. I'm going to show you something that I think is truly phenomenally prophetic. I'm going to show you some of his drawings. Now, it's all he has. He never built anything. He died too young. He drew a number of futuristic drawings. He called it the New City. This is called the Città Nuova, the New City. He exhibited this in June of 1914 at the Emilia Artistica Gallery. Look at that. Now, guys, this is 1914. This guy is a prophet. I think it's stunning. Look at what he's done here. In 1914, and a little later, in 1915, he wrote a manifesto of futurist architecture. He said this: we must begin, and by the way, this is before Frank Lloyd Wright said all this, the use of raw, original arrangements of material that should be brightly colored. We must make an organic shape, a shape that involves both nature and a futuristic push towards the modern. So what do we have here? Well, I want to show you a couple of his images. This is the vision of a very vast, multi-level, integrated urban complex. Does it look familiar? With vast setback structures, skyscrapers, walkways. Go to the next one. Look at this. Come on. It's amazing. This is like as prophetic as what Leonardo da Vinci did in his notebooks when he was drawing bicycles and parachutes. Look at this young man. I mean, he was drawing the cities of the future. In fact, I've seen cities almost look just like that. And he was saying cities of the future will look like this. Massive megastructures that house people, that have very quick transformation. In fact, he actually wrote in his manifesto that one day we would have moving sidewalks where we could just stand on them and move us. Ever been to the airport? Yeah. Amazing. Go to the next one. You have a couple of beautiful drawings. Love this stuff. Look at that. Aerial walkways, aerial driveways. You said in the future we would have cars that drove themselves. Just the other day, reading Science magazine, we're already there. So again, we lost a genius in World War I. Sadly enough. All right, our final thing I'm going to show you is that. Oh, look at that. Come on. That's a skyscraper. It's a city apartment. This is where we were going. He knew it exactly, and all before World War I. Okay, the next guy, and our final talk tonight is on one of the great geniuses, I think, of all time. And Dr. Lutz knows how much I love this guy. Although I wouldn't want to take an exam from him. Look at those glasses. Boy, that's a European intellectual, isn't it? But anyway, every architect fears this man. Why? Because, well, obviously he's so brilliant. He didn't meet Frank Lloyd Wright, but we'll talk about it. His name is Corbusier. He was Swiss. Spent most of his life in France, of course, and he died in 1965. He was the first to really understand, along with Frank Lloyd Wright, the use of reinforced concrete. He designed for industry. He proposed mass-produced houses for cities and a lot of what we now call prefab. In 1960, he moves to Paris. He starts in a magazine called L'Esprit Nouveau, the New Spirit. But the most brilliant thing he ever wrote was a small pamphlet, small book called Toward a New Architecture, 1923. Brilliant stuff. And in it, he says this: architecture is the masterly, correct, and magnificent play of masses brought together light. It's all about light. You have to understand why they talk so much about light here. Frank Lloyd Wright did the same thing in America with his prairie school designs. By the way, we have some of those right here in Atlanta, or at least imitations of it. Light was important. Why? When you think about 19th, you ever been into a 19th century house? These are dank, dark, dismal affairs. Don't you like that alliteration? Dank, dark, and dismal. That's what they are. Going to a Victorian house, I just want to go, please, get me out. Narrow hallways, dark rooms, thick paneling, everything Frank Lloyd Wright hated, including carpeting. So get rid of that too. Well, anyway, Le Corbusier, in a different vein, and in a more European way, was doing pretty much what Frank Lloyd Wright did in the U.S. And so just to show you a couple of things he did here, his designs were based on what he called machine aesthetic. Now, a lot of people criticize him for saying this. We don't want to live in machines, people say, but by God, guys, we all live in machines. Get in your car, you have 32 different computers surrounding you, right? And you go to your house. Now you can actually, iPad your garage door from 200 miles away. So we're living in machines whether you like it or not, and I love it. And I think there's nothing wrong with it, and I think we all benefit from it. This guy started it, right? He started it, the machine aesthetic. What did he really mean? He meant that at that time, the machines, of course, were bright, clean, beautiful, streamlined. And he wanted houses to be like that. He said we should live in machines, inside them. Let the machines do the work. So, just to show you how amazing it is, and by the way, next time you think you don't have any time for anything, let me show you what this guy did in 6 decades of his life. In 6 decades, he did the following: 75 different edifices in 12 different countries, 42 entirely complete city planning projects, 8,000 drawings, 400 paintings, 44 sculptures, 34 books, 175 articles published in scientifically reviewed magazines, and 6,500 private letters. He never watched TV. Okay. So, Basically what he did, it was an idea that he wanted to reject the distinction between art and everyday objects. He wanted to rid that notion. He wanted to get rid of art for art's sake. He said art should be in our daily lives. He liked the ancient Egyptian idea because there wasn't any. The Egyptians didn't have a word for art. Everything was beautiful and functional at the same time. He wanted to restore that to the American, or rather to the European continent. So he advanced some very radical approaches to city planning. He was one of the first people to actually get in an airplane and fly over South America and transform the vision of cities. He submitted plans for Buenos Aires and also for Algiers. Amazing. He tried unsuccessfully, by the way, to get all the technocrats in Europe to come through with his redesign of the cities. They didn't listen to him, they should. And after his 60th birthday, he designed the UN headquarters in New York. So if you ever go to New York, those headquarters were designed by Le Corbusier. You can call him Le Corbu, although he may not like that. But anyway, he also designed the entire city in Chandra, India. Okay, so let me show you what he did, just as one example. So we'll come now to the Villa Savoy. Savoy, some people like to say it, so whatever we call it. This villa in 1931, just amazing. I mean, this is the epitome of the beginning of everything. When we look at it now, we kind of yawn and go, yeah, I've seen stuff like that. You know, 60s housing, right? Okay, cool enough, but you got to remember this was built in 1929. Stunning. What a stunning idea. Nobody ever seen anything like this. I've been here, right? It took a long time to get up to it, drive all the way up to it. It really, his influence came from Palladio in ancient Greece, interesting enough, and contemporary Greece. He took a voyage on ocean liners to Greece, and he went to Corfu, he went to Santorini, and all the different Greek islands, and he had many, many drawings of the houses that, if you've ever been, those white block houses up on the cliffs, and he loved that. He loved the whiteness of white. And so what he decided to do was go against Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright wanted houses to hug the ground, to get cozy with nature, have a big central fireplace in the middle of the house. He was still very much into that thing, but Frank Lloyd Wright loved nature. Le Corbusier said, are you kidding me? Let's do against nature. This is against nature. It's saying, I'm built by humans, right? I'm not going to be built over a waterfall. I'm going to be built in the middle of some grass, and I'm going to be elevated. So what he did is this. In his tour to New York, he came up with basically 5 points. I won't go over every one of them, but you see some of them here just right in your face. The first thing he said was, the climate in France is too wet and damp to build the most awful things ever created by human beings, which were, according to Frank Lloyd Wright, things called basements, right? I hate basements too. So no more basements. You don't gouge out the earth to make a basement which nobody ever uses anymore. So here's what we did. We're going to elevate our houses on what he called his Greek columns. Pilates is what he called them. So he's got concrete reinforced columns running around, and he elevates the house above ground. Then, marvelously enough, to show that he was so interested, he loved automobiles, so he actually created the ground floor. I don't know if you can see it or not, but you curve around like that, his garage is in the back. And there's a curving ground floor on the base down at the very bottom there. That was dictated by a precise measurement of the turning radius of the car. And the driveway continues all the way into the Pilates, all the way into the back. You don't see it. So we've got, if you go to the next image. Well, you know, before you do that, one thing. Okay. The other thing was, another point of his architecture was, okay, you got these. He said, first, elevate your house in Pilates. Second, ribbon windows. Look at that. Whole new idea. We've seen plenty of it now. You yawn when you see it. But you can thank Le Corbusier. What you're seeing there is his approach to windows. Because when we think of a window, first of all, we always think of houses like this. Here's the house, here's the gable, here's the front door. You open up the front door, you walk in, oh look at there, there's the drawing room, there's the living room, there's the kitchen, there's the living room. Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier wanted a grand entrance into the house. Grand in this sense, not the 19th century grand, but an entrance that surprises you, that's mysterious. By the way, if I were to ask you a question, what are you doing? Do you love it? Same thing with the Roby House. You've been to Chicago? See the Roby House? You can't figure out where the door is. You just walk around, get into it. It's all influenced by Japanese architecture. So anyway, so the other thing was windows. You get a mediocre architect, he's going to draw a window like this. Right? A little square on the wall. How nice. What he decided to do is a thing called ribbon windows. What you do is you take the planar surface, this is unite concrete, and you run the windows all the way across the length of that. It makes much more of a aesthetic view so that every single sequence is an image of the nature you're looking at in different slots. Brilliant. So that's what we have here. So then if we go to the next slide, we're going to look at some of the sculptural ramps and all the stairs and 3 levels of this thing. And what he does here is the main living area is on the second floor with sliding glass doors, if I can do it at that time. All 4 elevations are essentially identical, but the interior partitions do not necessarily correspond to the columns that we saw on the outside. The interior represents industrial parts. He was fascinated by the new factories, clean factories of that time, but also, most importantly, can you tell? I think we have another slide of this, so is this it? Okay, well, take a look at it. What does this look like to you? Anybody tell me? These gangplanks with the wonderful white railings, 1912, one runs into an iceberg. Ocean liners. He loved ocean liners. He took many trips on ocean liners. Met Frank Lloyd Wright. Back then, that was the only way to get across the Atlantic, right? Because the flights were just coming in. So what he did is he took ocean liner iconography, if you will, ocean liner structural ideas, and puts them into this house. So you're up on the top floor here. What's beautiful about this is a flat surface, as you can see. Wonderful Barcelona chairs. Love those things. These Vandal. And then, of course, glass and a lot of views, and the sky is totally open. So again, one of the new ideas in architecture was you don't need houses like this anymore. You do this. Flat roof. That gives you more space up here. You can have parties up here, and it did. And you can have a lot of ways to capture rain, so there's no problem there. And a lot of game planks and walkways. He loved that whole idea. So this was his new approach, and by the way, it's amazing. The same year that he built this stock market crashes, 1929. So one thing and then another. Let me show you final one, and our final image for the night is his church. Now that's a church, okay? Except critics would look at it and say, what is that? And Le Corbusier said, it's a church. And their response was, well, it doesn't look like a church. And his response was, what does a church have to look like? Welcome to the 20th century, right? So this is his famous Notre Dame de Blois. This was done in 1950, 1955, a continuation of everything we talked about. A perfect culmination of what we talked about tonight. It replaces a 19th century chapel destroyed in World War II. Inspired, he said, by a shell that he found on the Long Island beach in 1946. Amazing when these artists get this out of this. It's made of a lightweight concrete roof shell over whitewashed masonry walls, as you can see. Now, not only did he get his inspiration from the shell, we also heard that he got inspiration from a number of things, like, for example, the bottom of the ship of salvation, like Noah's Ark, right? Also, the hats of the nuns in that area looks like that as well. Anyway, he's an atheist. He was not a believer. This got him into a little bit of trouble, as you can imagine. This is a Catholic memorial church. But, okay. And so they allowed it. And basically, we have a curving nave with glass painted by the architect. We'll look at that in a moment. No windows on the west side, as you can see. The roof is raised, I don't know if you can see it or not, about 4 inches along the walls on columns with gaps filled with clear glass. You can see them, which creates kind of a halo of light. Now, a lot of students look at this and just don't like it. I said, yeah, but you've never been inside of it. Can you go inside of it? Go away. So let's see the inside. There you go. Beautiful, isn't it? Yes, right. Right? Now, I can worship in that place. Right? I don't need a steeple and boring pews. That. Right? So, why? Well, first of all, I just go in for the architecture. But anyway, but take a look at this. See that little area there? That's all glass. 4 inches from the wall to the roof, right there. And that created a beautiful, mysterious halo around the whole thing. Inside, there are 3 towers painted different colors. The east wall, of course, is curved. You already saw that to reflect the voices of Easter choir outside on the altar. The altar. You go back for a second there, Holly. Can you see the altar here? And where the mass is given? Here's the altar. That's where the choir, and this would allow for a beautiful acoustic. Actually heard it there. Quite nice. So what he did here was, as you can well imagine, a new attempt to go inside to create a structural surface, much like we saw with paintings, to move us away from the fact that you have to have delineated, pure classical forms of windows. Now, what do we have here? We have offset, almost random placement, and he punctuates the wall and paints this glass in here with all some very abstract religious images. And then, as you can see, the roof curves down toward the altar and back up again as you are sitting in the actual space. And that allows for a sense of sensation of heaviness and weight, but as you go towards the altar, it sweeps up. Beautiful. So what he's trying to do here is give us a whole new approach to how one can worship, how one can see a building, and how architecture can actually shape us and reshape it. So if you look at everything we looked at tonight, several things come to mind. One, in 1920, I should say from 1900 to 1920, we see a revolutionary, radical approach to canvas, to sculpture, and to architecture. It continued all the way to the 50s, and it's still with us today. That revolution, 1900, 1920, has profoundly altered our perception of what we're seeing. And what we see is not really what's there. As Picasso said, it's not what we see, it's what we